People say Sir Andrew Roberts is Britain's greatest living historian. I disagree. I'd argue that he's the world's greatest living historian. 20 books he has written or edited, and which have been translated into 28 languages, have redefined our understanding of leaders and leadership, of empires and nations, of the forces that have shaped and in some cases misshaped the modern world. We've been privileged to welcome Sir Andrew here on Foreign Policy in the past, most recently just after he co-authored with General David Petraeus a book on modern warfare, conflict, the evolution of warfare from 1945 to Gaza. He also is with us after publishing biographies of George III, the last King of America, of Winston Churchill, and of Napoleon. He's won more awards than I have time to mention, but among them is the Bradley Prize, for which I'm proud to say I nominated him. In 2022, he was elevated to the House of Lords as Baron Roberts of Belgravia, which I believe is the proper pronunciation. He corrected me last time, but very tactfully. His most recent accomplishment, chairing the 7 October Parliamentary Commission report, the first publication aimed at establishing and preserving an accurate record of the barbaric pogrom carried out by Hamas and Gazans Hamas-adjacent against Israelis and those Israeli-adjacent. We're privileged to have Sir Andrew with us today. We're pleased that you're joining us too, here on Foreign Policy. Well, really good to see you, and thanks for coming in and seeing us, even virtually, remotely. It's just good to see you.
Well, thanks for inviting me on, Cliff, and thanks ever so much for that, in my view, completely hyperbolic introduction. If you can see my headphones moving away from each other, it's because my head is growing.
Well, I try to think of who your competitors might be, and only very few names come to mind in your weight class, I guess I would say, your intellectual weight class. I guess the first thing to start with is what motivated you to spend your time and your energy sharing the research of what I think is properly called the All-Party Parliamentary Group on UK-Israel, and which has produced now the most comprehensive account of the Hamas invasion so far. The Israelis don't have anything like it, documenting the slaughter. I know you wrote about this in The Spectator, but only, I think, the British edition, and there may be one or two of our listeners who haven't read the British edition of The Spectator in the last few weeks.
Thank you. Yes, the All-Party Parliamentary Group is as it sounds, it's very non-partisan. We cover the whole waterfront politically in Britain, not the new ultra Islamist parties, obviously in the House of Commons, but pretty much everybody else. And so when I was asked to chair this report, which, as you say, is a hugely well documented and well footnoted and, in my view, evidentially irrefutable report about what happened in the 48 hours after the attack at 6:29 a.m. on the 7th of October. I couldn't say no. I've been a supporter of Israel all my life. Although I'm myself a Gentile, I recognized this as a military historian as the most appalling and depraved incident, really, that I could think of historically since the rape of Nanjing in 1937.
And I think you better than most understand why it's important to have a historical document such as this as quickly as possible, utilizing witnesses, victims. I mean, to have a record of this for future historians, generations of future historians. They now have something very solid to begin to work from. And I'll just add this: it was not clear that was going to be the case, because, as you point out, a sort of Holocaust denial, an October 8th denial, began almost within hours of the pogrom.
That's right. With the Holocaust denial, that did take years. As far as the 7th of October was concerned, actually at 12:50 p.m. London time, which is 2:50 p.m. Israel time. So whilst the massacres are still taking place, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign in London lodged a request with the Metropolitan Police in London to hold the first of their anti-Israel marches. So 3 weeks or so before Israel even started retaliating for the 7th of October, the Palestinian Solidarity campaign were already starting to celebrate it and also to deny it. It's very interesting. You would have thought logically it's impossible to celebrate something you deny or deny something that you're celebrating, but they've managed, however illogically, to do both things at the same time.
Yeah, this is not in the report, but this become a bit of a controversy here, whether these various groups that are close to Hamas, that like Hamas, that support Hamas rhetorically or materially, whether they may have had some inkling this was going to happen because they were so fast to have propaganda materials, to be organized, to know what they were doing. I mean, it doesn't mean they knew when it was going to happen, but they may have known something like this was going to happen, and they were prepared for that eventuality. I don't know if you just have any thoughts about that. I'm not sure there's any proof or even solid evidence yet.
No, I don't have any. And if I did, I'd have put it in the report. But the fact was that we had to concentrate very much, really, on those 48 hours. If we started to do anything more than that, we'd wind up writing a history of the Israeli-Hamas conflict. But as you say, they were very, very quick off the mark, weren't they? It didn't take many hours between hearing about these first attacks and having all the sort of T-shirts printed with the paragliders
Right.
on, all the placards, all the people ready to chant from the river to the sea, and so on. It was they were like rats up a drain pipe.
You perhaps say just a few words about the methodology you used. I know it was rigorous, but I think it's important if we have people on who are historians or plan to be historians to understand how the research is done for something for a project like this.
Well, yes, absolutely. In order to make the report irrefutable, we went to as many sources, reliable sources, as we could find. So, of course, actually, ironically, with regard to the Hamas denial of 7th of October, it was, of course, their own GoPro cameras, which provided an enormous amount of video evidence for what they were doing. Some of the most depraved tortures and so on can be seen, and murders can be seen on the GoPro cameras that they were wearing. And they were wearing them so that they would then be able to upload them onto the Facebook pages of victims' families, and also exult and celebrate using them themselves. It was so video evidence is one thing, photographic evidence, of course, taken in the immediate aftermath, witness statements from survivors, police statements, military records, academic articles. The chief pathologist of Israel was tremendously helpful in providing some of the X-rays and so on of the corpses to show the horrific bloodlust that took over. But a premeditated bloodlust, interestingly, and this is something historically, speaking as a military historian, you don't get that much of. Usually, bloodlust is a sort of spontaneous, foul thing, but a spontaneous thing. How much fouler, actually, for it to have been entirely premeditated and planned and essentially factored in to Hamas's plans. Not just Hamas. We go into the role of Palestinian Jihad and 6 other groups that were involved in the outrages.
Yeah, there were. I mean, that's something I think a lot of people don't know, that there are Hamas has been the power in Gaza ever since 2007. They kicked out the Palestinian Authority and Fatah at that time. That was 2 years after the Israelis totally withdrew from Gaza. Every settler, if you want to call it that, every farm, they left the greenhouses, and they thought those greenhouses could be helpful to the Palestinians. They were destroyed by the Palestinians because they were Zionist greenhouses. Every cemetery, every synagogue was removed. But there are, as you say, several other terrorist groups that Hamas allows to exist alongside them. And apparently they took part in this as well, which suggests that at some point, I don't know if it was on October 7th or a week before, that they were informed that there's going to be this invasion and we'd like your help. Maybe you want to just say a couple of words about which groups those were. Well, I mean, one of them, for example, would be Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which I would say is a owned and operated a terrorist group owned and operated from Tehran entirely. Hamas is influenced by Tehran, but it has some agency, or has had it. Is that how you see it too?
Undoubtedly, yeah. PIJ is a franchise of the Iranian state.
Yeah.
Full stop. And so are several of the others, by the way. But the way in which they were all sort of ready, straining at the leash, essentially, to after the initial attack by the Hamas terrorists, to flood through. We in this report estimate about 7,000 people left Gaza to try and rape and kill and torture and pillage in southern Israel. And so quite a lot of those people were actual civilians who just were told what was going on and leapt at the chance to be as vicious and hateful as possible. But the others were either Hamas fighters, terrorists as I call them, and then these other 7 groups, which we go into the very briefly the history and the background of them in the report. I wonder whether or not I could also just say one other thing about the sort of gruesome and gory nature of the report, which some people have totally understandably, in my view, criticised. But in a sense, we had to. We were trying to write the report, the definitive report on a massacre. You can't really do that unless you do have some photographs and some testimony about what actually went on, which is so gruesome and so gory and so appalling. But what we did actually was to cut out everything that we couldn't double check, and everything that we thought might well be true, but we couldn't prove was true. And so actually the report could have been an awful lot more gruesome than it actually is.
But the report fills over 300 pages, and quite a few of those pages are very, very detailed, very granular reports of what happened in a specific kibbutz or a specific city like Sderot. I mean, goes into into great detail. I mean,
we cover every one of the 32 communities, the 3 cities, the both the music festivals. All the major places where killings took place. We cover, and that was partly because. And as you say, it's over 300 pages, but all of them fully backed up with footnotes and endnotes about from respected sources. But we in a sense had to do that because what we wanted to do, as well as prove to the future denialists and the present day denialists that this thing actually did take place. Another thing we wanted to do was to memorialize the victims, because sometimes, historically, as a military historian, when I write about, 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or something, these become great geopolitical events that go down in history. But you very often forget the individuals who were the victims of these terrible crimes. And so what we wanted to do, and what I hope we have done in this report, is firstly, of course, give the name of every single person who died, but also the circumstances in which they died very often. And although, what we were trying to do, of course, is a tiny, infinitesimally tiny version of what Yad Vashem, the Book of the Dead, does, is to remind people of people's names, who they were. There were 18 Britons who died that day. And so we give little sort of paragraphs, little thumbnail sketches of who these individuals, these personalities, these people were.
And I want to talk a little bit more about the victims, but just I'll provide just a few facts that struck me. 1,100 182 people killed, over 4,000 injured, 251 hostages taken. Among the dead, 316 women and children. About half of the living hostages were women and children. There were victims, as you say, from UK, but there were victims from 44 different countries, actually. My understanding is that the invaders they knew they were going to go to these various kibbutzim, and in fact, there had been on these kibbutzim Gazans employed. Gazans who people don't know that thousands of Gazans. I think the number on October 6th, before this happened, was something like 17,000 Gazans a day were coming in to take jobs in Israel at higher wages than they could get. From what I understand, on the not least on the kibbutzim, the people who employed those Gazans thought, we have a good relation with them. That's an important thing that we're doing. We're beginning to build people-to-people bridges for peace. And whether they were coerced or not, there was a tremendous intelligence about who was in what house and what was going on. In other words, that the Gazans they had employed and in some cases befriended and taken to hospitals if they were sick in Israel, they had provided intelligence to Hamas in order to kill them better. All that's correct, yes?
Yes, and actually, so, as you say, some of the intelligence goes down to which side of the bed the man slept on and which side the woman slept on, where weapons, of course, were being kept, how old the children are, and so on. So when the terrorists went into the kibbutzim, as you say, they knew precisely where to go. They knew exactly where to try to prevent the local home guard from getting their weapons and so on. So it was, and there's only one place where this information could have come from, and sometimes that is the domestic servants of people who were living and working there. So it's it sort of adds an extra horrific dimension to think that the people who you think were your friends, and certainly your employees, were helping the plan to kill you.
Yeah. I mean, it was well known that the people living in what's called the Gaza envelope in that area and who were on kibbutzim, which means they're kind of communal farmers. They tended to be among the most dovish of Israelis, the most sympathetic towards the Palestinians and to making concessions. The Nova Music Festival that was taking place, am I correct in believing that Hamas didn't necessarily expect that and found that as something of a bonus that wasn't part of the plan, that they were going to find them there? Do you know?
I don't know. But I'd be really surprised because, as I say, the intelligence was so good about what was going on. And of course, the festival was attacked by paragliders. And so they did know where to land, and where to go. So, and they were able to set up ambushes along Route 232 very quickly, and they knew where all the cars were being parked and so on. So, my hunch, and it's not in the report because we couldn't prove it, but my hunch is that they knew perfectly well that there were going to be those festivals taking place.
Yeah.
Just to add, Cliff, again, I don't have any proof of this, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the reasons that they chose the day, not just because it was a holy day and not just because the IDF, lots of the members of the IDF were not going to be in their stations, but at home. But the fact that there were also going to be loads and loads of young people enjoying themselves at a music festival, because it is, of course, young people who they wanted to kill.
Right, and they did. They also invaded Bedouin villages, and they didn't spare Israeli Arabs. On the contrary, I think they thought Israeli Arabs are essentially traitors to the cause.
That's right. Yes, collaborators, sort of quislings, as they would see it. In all of this, it's of course it's just one ghastly thing after another. However, there are a few, and I think it's very important to recognize this, and we do this in the report. There are a few wonderful shafts of sunshine, and one of them is the Bedouin Arab part-time policeman who saved 200 people going back into the festival again and again throughout the throughout the morning and into the early afternoon, and spiriting people away from the festival. And he, who I met actually when I went. Oh, sorry, that was another thing. Of course, we did go to Israel in order to interview people, and also met some of these heroic figures who did wonderful things that day. And so, you know, that you do see a positive side of human nature in shafts of it, at least, in what is otherwise obviously an incredibly dark moment in history.
Also, another place under attack was a city that I've been to a number of times, Sderot, which is like a mile or so from the border, very close on. And it's, people would say it's a working class town. It's a destination for Jewish refugees, mostly from the Middle East and North Africa, from places their families had lived maybe for thousands of years, but got thrown out after the creation, 1940, late 1940s and 1950s, and on from there. And there's still people coming. Ethiopian Jews you would find there, some probably Russian Jews, but the town was hit very hard.
That's right, and well, you're right about how old Sderot is. It's actually, the name is found in the Bible, so that it must be thousands of years old by its very nature. But also, the attack on the police station there was absolutely ferocious. I mean, essentially, it was completely destroyed. There were some very brave policemen who fought back, but it was a sort of sign, a symbol, really, of the extraordinary amount of weapons that were brought over the border by Hamas. I went to a army camp and saw some of these weapons, and what they very much underlined for me was the premeditated nature of the horrors. What you saw were enormous, great explosive devices that were made to precisely the right measurements to fit onto the safe room doors of safe rooms in the kibbutzim, and lots of weapons from Belarus, China, Russia, obviously, loads of
North Korea and Iran, I believe, right?
Both of those as well. So yes, it's not just by any means just a terrorist incident. This is an attack that was helped enormously by all of those, the coalition of ill will, as some people are calling it, that the United States and the West are facing today.
Though we don't know, right, whether anybody in Tehran, anybody in Beirut, anybody in Damascus or Moscow knew that this was going to happen that day, or even perhaps. Well, I have to figure that Hezbollah knew that this was. Some knew that this was being conceived and planned because it took years, but probably didn't know the date because that was a matter of operational security. That would be, I'm guessing a little bit, but is that how you see it?
Again, we don't go into this.
I know you don't know.
Report because we
you don't know.
We don't know. But oh yes, I mean absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. Of course, this wasn't a thing that was going to take the whole of the rest of the pro-Iran Shia world by surprise. The senior people must have known that something was going to happen, something was going to be planned. Apart from everything else, quite a lot of training took place in Tehran.
Yeah.
But you don't give the actual final day. If you're trying to get operational surprise, which they did have, of course you don't blare out the moment of the attack.
Right. And I find myself squeamish a little bit, oddly enough, talking about this, but the report is very clear that the perpetrators systematically killed their victims through shootings, asphyxiation, burning, grenade explosions, rocket-propelled grenade, missile attacks. They committed acts of mutilation, sexual violence, and other atrocities, some even after their victims' deaths. Again, all that, they documented it for you. It was on the GoPro and social media posts. One that strikes me is the phone call of a Hamas terrorist to his father, because it just shows the mindset. I have it here. Hello, or he's calling and he says, "Hello, Baba. I am speaking with you from Mefal Sim. Open your WhatsApp. Tell Wiam. Look at all the dead bodies. See how many I killed myself, Baba. Your son killed Jews. Here I'm inside Mefal Sim, Baba. I'm speaking to you from a Jewish lady's phone. I killed her. Then I killed her husband. I killed 10 myself, Baba. 10 with my own hands, Baba. Open your WhatsApp and see how many I killed. Open up. I'll call on WhatsApp. Tell Wiam, come on." I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Yeah, and unfortunately also, I think I'm right in saying with that particular incident, the mother of the terrorists celebrated and congratulated her son. So you've only got one side of the conversation there. On the other side of the conversation is a pretty disgusting reaction.
Yeah, important to point out, I think that that hostage shaking was planned, and they did better than they expected, probably, in terms of how many hostages they could take. And one conclusion one has to draw from that is the attacks of October 7th are not really over, because there are still hostages being held and being tortured, denied the right even to see the Red Cross or the Red Crescent or whatever it is. They've never been allowed, being starved to death. That continues.
Absolutely. But one of the things about them having more hostages than they were expecting was that they didn't initially have enough places to keep them in the tunnels, and so they were farmed out to other friendly organizations. And we know from Emily Damari that one of those, who's the actual hostage who this report is dedicated to, tremendously brave young lady with a wonderful mother, Mandy Damari. And what she said was that one of the places that she was kept was in an UNRWA house. So you have absolutely incontrovertible evidence that UNRWA was up to its neck in this as well.
Yeah, my guess is that UNRWA fully cooperated with Hamas, and the UNRWA employees did so either because they supported the cause or because they were indifferent for the cause of, I guess, and somebody who didn't want to be working hand in glove with a terrorist organization probably would have, asked for a transfer to some other part of the UN. But maybe we'll come back to the UN in a bit, because their role has been rather disgraceful. But I do want to make sure we get in. What you learned about the jihadists, Hamas and others, about what you call in the report their aims and plans. I think that's kind of crucial to understanding the threats faced not only by Israel but by other democratic societies who are hated by jihadis.
Oh, it's pretty straightforward, isn't it? It's the elimination of the Jewish state, the annihilation, preferably by violence, of the state of Israel. That's what From the River to the Sea means. Can't really be interpreted as anything else. And so the 7th of October is not just some kind of a one-off. It's something that they have told the hostages, the ones that were released, that they want to do again and again and again. And what they will do again and again and again, if they get the chance to. And that's why it's perfectly responsible, as far as I'm concerned, for Israel to wish to annihilate Hamas.
Interestingly, in the last few days, we've been seeing more people in Gaza be outspoken in their opposition to Hamas' continued rule. Now, I don't know. I don't believe in the polls from there. I don't know if this is a few hundred. I think that part of the reason that they're more outspoken is it's less dangerous to be outspoken right now because Hamas has been largely decimated.
Yes, but remember that already hundreds of Hamas terrorists have been let free as part of the deal.
Right.
And so Hamas also have a long history of viciously repressing any internal criticism. So, they are very brave, those few hundred people who in northern Gaza were able to demonstrate. The videos obviously were hugely encouraging, seeing quite how many people they were, and the fact that it seemed to cover men and women, young and old, and so on. But the fact is that you have to be tremendously brave, frankly, to allow your face to be shown on one of those videos, because they will be hunted down as soon as Hamas regains control, which it simply therefore mustn't be allowed to do.
It speaks volumes that the Hamas members during the ceasefire proudly wore their uniforms. As soon as the ceasefire ended, they took off their uniforms, dressed in civilian clothes, and/or descended into the tunnels where Gaza civilians are not allowed to be.
That's right. It's a guerrilla army. That's how guerrilla armies fight, of course, and have done for hundreds of years. But I think the slight difference that we see with this campaign is that usually guerrilla armies that sort of rise up from the people don't want the people to be harmed. Whereas with Hamas, they either couldn't care less, clearly, or actually they work out that the world's reaction being what it is, in fact, it's in their interest that they should be harmed. So using the Palestinian people, the Gazan people, as human shields is something that has worked very well to Hamas's advantage, because it's meant that the deaths of the civilians are blamed on the IDF rather than the people they should be blamed on, which are the people who started this terrible war.
And the use of human shields is, without question, a violation of international humanitarian laws, law of armed conflict, all that. But that's lost on the supporters of Hamas. I think it's also, in terms of aims and plans, just to be clear that the Hamas's goal, and those that side with them, is not the establishment of a Palestinian state, but rather to replace the Jewish state. And actually, if it's Hamas, it's not with a Palestinian state, it's with an Islamic emirate, a province of what they believe will be the reborn caliphate. The Glass Caliphate, as a historian, probably history students at Columbia University don't know, collapsed after World War I. Then there was a possibility under the mandate given to Britain by the League of Nations, to establish new nations in what had been territories of the Ottoman Empire. And whether it's Lebanon, or whether it's Syria or Iraq, or the concept of a Palestinian, all that comes only from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the British mandate.
That's exactly right, yes. 1922 is a key moment, because that's the time that the last Ottoman Sultan, the Caliph, leaves Istanbul and goes off into exile. And that's therefore the end of it. And as we know from Osama bin Laden's writings and speeches, that rankles very badly still with the Islamists some 100+ years later. And so when the people call for a resurgence of the caliphate, another ummah, what they're really talking about, as you say, is not creating just a Palestinian state, but a state which will be united with the ISIS state and some of the Al-Qaeda elements, and all essentially of the truly vicious extremists in the Islamic world, and that's the state that they're after. Ultimately, that's the final state, and it would be absolutely catastrophic for civilization if that were to take place. Which is why countries like the United States and my country, Great Britain, and many others should not be criticizing and attacking Israel now, should not be refusing to sell arms to Israel as Britain is doing, should not be threatening to arrest the Israeli Prime Minister if he leaves Israel, and all of these various other appalling ill treatment of Israel, the victim, but standing by Israel and supporting Israel and helping Israel, because it's on the absolute front line in this massive struggle between civilization and barbarism.
And you may have something interesting theoretically to say about why it is so much that those on the left who care about gay rights, who care about women's rights, who care about economic development, why they find themselves in solidarity with Islamists and jihadists who don't agree with them on any of these things. I mean, my guess is they see them, as Carlos the Jackal did when he was in writing about this from a French jail. He says, well, they're the serious revolutionaries in the world. And if we want a revolution against the West, against capitalism, against all the values of the West, we've got to kind of tie our horse to that wagon, because that's the one that's going to create the revolution. Who else is going to do it for us?
Yes, that's right. I mean, the internal contradictions on the left are so massive. The obvious one, as you say, being the LGBT support for Palestine, which whenever any of those kinds of lifestyle choices emerge in Gaza itself, they lead to people being tortured and killed and dragged behind cars until they die and hanged from cranes.
Yeah.
The idea that these people in the West are essentially putting their hatred of the West and its values above their own identity interests, it seems extraordinary. The classic example, of course, being the United Nations Women's Committee, which took 6 months to criticize and to admit that rapes took place on the 7th of October. 6 months. Extraordinary.
And the World Health Organization, like UNRWA, worked hand in glove with Hamas, didn't complain about hospitals being used for command and control and for hiding terrorists. They were fine with that. And there was a report issued not long ago by the UN Human Rights Council, which I think you mentioned in one of your articles or in the forward, I don't remember where, which was fairly awful in terms of describing what had happened with the Hamas invasion. You know what I'm speaking of, the report, I mean.
Of course, yeah. Well, that the whole United Nations human rights thing really has to be looked at again, mustn't it? I mean, any organization which can have as its committee chair Iran.
Yeah.
It's had Iran, North Korea, Cuba, you name it, countries which are so hostile to the concept of human rights, except for, verbally. So that's part of a much wider debate, isn't it? That's about
it is
the United Nations. We've been discussing that really since the, I think, 1970s. So frankly, I'm, as a historian and somebody of conservative disposition who doesn't believe that human nature is getting much better, frankly, I don't think that the last half century has seen very many positive advances when it comes to the United Nations.
No, but billions of dollars of certainly of American taxpayer money go to the United Nations. The Secretary General Guterres, he's not ashamed of what UNRWA has done. He's defending UNRWA. He's defending the WHO. All of that. The Human Rights Council's Commission of Inquiry accused Israel of committing against Palestinians the very war crimes, which, as you point out, were captured in living color on the GoPro cameras that Hamas perpetrated, and the support we continue to support this organization as if it's going to get better at some point, and I think it's pretty clear that it will not. And some attention, and this is not necessarily for you, needs to be thought about what you do about an organization in which the rot is so deep, and they're still doing it with our money. Good. Maybe Elon Musk would take a look at that at some point. I want to ask one more question and one more, and then I'll ask you whatever else I haven't touched on that I should have. And that's talk a little bit about the reaction to the report, not least on social media, to you personally. Also, one of the things I did immediately was to Google BBC and the report. I couldn't find.
Why did you bother doing that? Why did you waste your time doing that, Cliff?
Well, the idea that the BBC would not cover a parliamentary report that's so fully done. I got to say, I mean, I know the BBC has terrible prejudice against Israelis, maybe against Jews. It's not what it used. I mean, I used to love the BBC when I was an Africa correspondent. I carried around a little shortwave radio, and every night I would listen to the BBC to know what's going on in the world. We had we didn't have social media back then. I'm so disappointed. But how that they wouldn't, I would think they would feel obliged to cover it. And the legacy media in general has not covered this in great depth. I guess I'd say.
No. I think we've had we've had quite a lot, certainly in Britain. And I've been doing interviews with Danish and German and Israeli.
Good,
obviously. It's been fine. The one great massive lacuna has been the BBC, which has got a complete blind spot when it comes to Israel. And you were talking about going around Africa. I'm sure today, if you got on the shortwave radio, it would be perfectly reasonable about the Congo. It would be very interesting about internal politics in Egypt or Gabon or South Africa or wherever. There's just one place, one place where it absolutely cannot be trusted to be objective at all, ever. And that is Israel. And you see it the whole time. It's not just my report being ignored. It is everything that they do, and also they absolutely refuse to accept any criticism whatsoever, because they say, oh no, but we're also attacked by Islamists, and therefore we've got to get a middle way between the two, and that's their answer pretty much to everything. And it's no answer whatsoever.
It's a very convenient answer to say, "Oh, yeah, the Islamists don't think we're being fair to them. Therefore, we must be fair." Very convenient.
With regard to the internet, sorry, you asked about the internet as well.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, X denounced the report as Zionist propaganda immediately, almost before it came out.
Including, by the way, I saw some professors that attacked you in the most vulgar language, and you got reacted. This is an academic. This is a scholar. At least attack me with some argument rather than just pejorative. I don't know, curse word, do we call it? Yes, I noticed that.
But yes, there's that. But actually, very often with these attacks, where they say no rapes took place, for example, just go to the relevant pages, and you will see, you will hear, you will be told things like the actual booklet that the terrorists were given had phrases in them in Hebrew, such as "spread your legs" and "take off your clothes" and other things like that. The photographic evidence, the pathology evidence, just so much of it makes it so clear that of course rapes took place, and terrible things that happened after the rapes as well. But to attack the report without even looking at it, which is what most of the criticism has done, is as far as I'm concerned, just sort of laughable, frankly. It really
is. It's laughable, but particularly tragic when it's coming from tenured professors at universities. And that's a whole other subject of what's happened to universities.
The idea this person is teaching people is absolutely terrifying.
Are there points that you'd like to also make that I didn't somehow draw out in this conversation?
No, absolutely. You've covered it all extremely well. Just to say, that I do hope that your listeners and viewers go to www.7oct Parliamentary Commission .com and read the report. That way they can make up their minds for themselves whether or not it's Zionist propaganda or whether it's a genuine and objective attempt on behalf of several historians, hard-working scholars, and people who really know the subject to try to memorialize the victims, but also make it impossible in 50 or 100 years' time for anybody to deny that this monstrous massacre took place.
I think true scholars, historians now, historians of the future, owe you a debt of gratitude for having done this work. I hope it wasn't thankless. I think there are a lot of people around the world who do thank you for doing that. So I'm glad we got a little chance to talk about it. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to see you. Thanks for this conversation today. And again, thanks for the work you do and can continue to do. Look forward to your next book. You write them faster than I can read them.
Well, that's why I'm in Paris at the moment. I'm working in the archives. But thanks very much indeed for having me on the show.
Thank you again, Sir Andrew. And thanks to all of you who have been with us for this conversation today here on Foreign Policy.